Welcome to Legal Keys, unlocking time, revenue, and results. The podcast that connects you with the people, technologies, and trending topics shaping the modern legal landscape. From cutting-edge AI innovations to high-growth marketing strategies and everything in between. Legal Keys is your go-to resource for actionable insights. Brought to you by Faster Outcomes and hosted by Tim Sawyer, two-time Inc. 500 co-founder entrepreneur. We're here to help you navigate the tools and trends driving success in today's legal world.
Hello, welcome back to Legal Keys, sponsored by Faster Outcomes, the ultimate legal intelligence platform for law firms of all shapes and sizes. First time joining us, we really appreciate you taking the time. Joining us for repeating, welcome back. We really appreciate the support, and it's going to be worth your time today because I have an amazing guest, and he is, to call him an AI enthusiast would be insulting to the word enthusiast. This guy is an AI maniac. He's a practicing attorney. I had the good fortune of seeing him speak at the winter bar meeting in the Maine Bar Association, which is also state in which he practices with Drummond Woodson. So I can't wait to introduce and want to say welcome to Justin. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it and excited to be here and talk a little bit about the state of AI in Maine and across the globe. So, yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
This audience needs to listen to what you have to say. I really enjoyed your talk. Really what drew me, and the reason I wanted to reach out and invite you, was your take on the practical and ethical uses of AI. So there's a lot of conversations happening around AI right now that are somewhat abstract or, more like intellectual exercises versus how can I use AI in my law firm today to go faster, to make more money, to be more efficient, to get more time back. And I want to make sure we spend some time covering that today. But one of the things that stuck out too, as I was on your LinkedIn profile, I noticed that it says you have a background in tribal law. I've never seen that. Give us a little insight on that.
Yeah, so I work at Drummond Woodson, and I've been here about 3 years, and we are one of the nation's leading law firms on tribal law. So we've got a few of my colleagues, Corey Hinton, Kane Smith, Rob Gips, kind of started this area of law, at least in Maine, developed a lot of the sort of protocols for tribes on how to navigate state and federal law. And when I back in 2019, 2020, I was here as a summer associate, and I was incredibly excited about that area of practice. And I was able to get in at the ground floor for a few of these tribal employment and tribal environmental, kind of like this crossover between tribal law and other established areas of law that I had a little bit more understanding of. But the practice kind of blew up on no account of my own. Those other folks I just mentioned really have been great at just like connecting with tribes. And I've always been a little bit, doing a little bit of that and a little bit of school law and environment, and employment law. And so it's like this grab bag of kind of unique areas of law that all of a sudden in 2022 in November, when ChatGPT came on the scene, things started to coalesce. There's all these players that could be incredibly benefited by the use of AI. And I began to advise and consult with a lot of municipal governments and some tribes and a lot of schools on these areas. And in particular, there's this organization called NAHARA. It's National Native American Human Resources Association. And the folks there have just been great at programming for the tribes that from huge tribes with tens of thousands of members to small tribes with just a couple hundred, on how AI could assist those tribes. So in short, or at least in less than 3 minutes, Tim, that has been the area that in tribal law I've seen the most overlap with AI. And what a weird, wild connection, and something I never thought I would be involved in law school.
It's meaningful work, though. I think it's great. And sticking along the themes of practical, right? So when you're giving advice and guidance to these groups, what would be a practical scenario where you say, hey, this is how AI can help your constituency? Walk me through that.
Well, the first thing is data preparation. So a lot of the clients I work with aren't enormous organizations that have been working to keep their data in the most organized, easily accessible medium. Oftentimes, they're still using physical records. They haven't really integrated optical recognition software to translate written to electronic text. And the first thing I always talk about is, to avail yourselves of these great leaps in technology, you really need some majority of essential documents to be digitized. And
right.
You'd be surprised at how many folks that is a huge first step for. That's not a given.
You'd be surprised how often we see that in law firms. Getting all their documents organized is a big part of what we do. And in case somebody listening missed it, you mentioned optical recognition, or OCR. In lay terms, explain what OCR is and how it has made a huge impact on the way we can ingest information with AI.
A lot of folks might be most familiar with the functions on their smartphones where they can actually take a picture and then within that picture highlight text. So I could take a picture of a book. El Corey's right here open next to me, and it's a how labor arbitration works. And I could take a picture of it and actually highlight text from that picture and drop it into notes or a text message. What's going on the back end there is that the latest iOS, or the last like 10 iOSs have had these functionalities built into them where at a high level you're able to isolate text characters in the pictures and put them into alphanumerical format instead of a JPEG format.
And so bring us up to speed on what AI platforms you're using that have OCR, and how could somebody, so now let's take it to a small law firm, right? You got a couple lawyers in there and they're trying to figure out, oh wait, how can I use AI, whether it's open source, whatever it is, and what's the practical application for them of OCR as it relates to PDFs and things like that, in aggregating all their own data?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think an OCR technology really helps in the day-to-day practice so much as it would help in data preparation. But I think a good example is I've got OpenAI's GPT on my phone, and I'm a subscriber and I have access to the latest models. And so what I can do with that is, because it's a multimodal, meaning it's not just text, it's not just images, it's not just audio, it's all three, and also it's code, and also it's increasingly other modes as well, other mediums. I'm able to interact between the mediums. So what I'll do is I'll take a picture of, just open book, and I'll take 5 or 6 pictures. I'll upload those to a chat with O Preview or O1, the latest model that ChatGPT has released, and then I'll drive to, I spend a lot of time on the road, and so I'll be in the car for 3 hours going to meet with a client, and I'll interrogate the text. I'll ask questions about it. I'll ask for, what, based on what I've asked and what you've read here, what would be a good next step for my research? Can you look that up? Can I ask you questions about that thing too? So that's kind of on a day-to-day practice level how I use that technology, Tim.
And so I want to, it's interesting because one of the things that we see a lot in particularly larger firms that want to use AI, the concept is knowledge, right? The ability to aggregate all your IP going back to inception in your law firm. So every template, every version of every contract, every opinion matter, you name it, everything they have, putting it into a non-contaminated single stance AI, right? And then it function becomes AI for them. And data, you bring up a really good point, and around data preparation. So one of the things that we see is in order to do that, to create this really powerful functioning law partner, you need to know where all your data is, and you have to have the ability to aggregate that and then again ingest that into an AI instance. What advice do you have? So, if you were to walk into a law firm today and say, hey, for you really to leverage the most advanced agentic AI, and you can talk about what that means, what do they need to do to get organized around that? How would you advise them?
Well, so one concept you mentioned is sort of the importance of data. There's kind of a saying in Maine, I think promulgated by one of the leaders of the Rue Institute here, but that your data is your competitive advantage. And that for law firms, it's not just that, but it's one of your biggest liabilities too. It's why we pay so much for cybersecurity. It's why we have all of these, dual factor authentications every time you try to get on Outlook. And I think the short of it is we can't use AI, off the shelf generative AI product the same way that members of the public can, because there's rules of professional conduct, there's standards of confidentiality that we owe our clients to meet. And so when I'm taking pictures of a book, it's very different from taking pictures of a recent complaint filed against one of my clients and trying to interrogate that, because that's not a public record. And I actually could violate several rules and professional conduct standards by doing so. So I think that for law firms around the country, you're either in one camp or another camp. The first is you have the money, you're a ropes and gray level firm, and you can develop a proprietary AI for 5, 10, 15 million. That's trained on your data set. It has the entire corpus, everything back to that partner who's on his way out, has been there for 60 years and really is just coming in once or twice a week to say hi to people. Everything from what he did back in the 60s to what you did yesterday, that's the context window. That's the bounds of the data that the model is trained on. And now you can interrogate that and ask, provide me a template for a motion for summary judgment in the following circumstances, and yada yada yada. And all of a sudden 70% of your work is complete. Now, right. I imagine at some point you want to talk about the billable hour, because that undermines everything that our law firms stand for, but in terms of the billable hour. But in short, that's what I feel like the biggest, when it comes to data preparation, the biggest hurdle is, could you train a model on that? And for, there's those law firms that are the ropes and gray level firms that could have a proprietary AI model. Great. Most of us aren't there. Most of us have to find some off-the-shelf product that we negotiate, endless confidentiality, service level agreements, privacy policies that at some level we find maybe meets our standard, and we can start training a model based on our data. That is a much harder path, but it's less costly.
Right. So if a law firm, you mentioned something, and it's a key distinction I want to draw here too, is a lot of times you'll be talking to lawyers and they're using open source ChatGPT, and they think because there are features identified within open source that they're okay to put client data in that, possibly medical data, and somehow that's protected within that open source. Unpack that. And I think you had actually talked a little bit about this in Maine, that's not great, right? That's not a great practice, and help the lawyer listening understand why that's not a great practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's less that the tech is open sourced, so much so that it's a private company that, might either use your data to train subsequent models or sell your data as part of their business model. If you're not paying for the service, you're the product, not the customer. So what you're giving it is training data. If you're paying, there's an option to opt out of this. You can check a box on OpenAI that says, don't use my conversations to train subsequent models. Now, that doesn't mean they don't capture and store your data, your conversations. Right. It just means that they've opted out of training for the time being. And so if you look at their policy, their privacy policy, there's different standards for their API, their application programming interface, whether it's programming with a certain device, Apple device, a Samsung device, I think can make a difference too. But in terms of the personal data they collect, they're collecting your account, their user, certain communication, and then any information you provide. So they can start to build a picture of who the customer is, and there's nothing keeping them from selling that to third-party advertisers. So if I'm an attorney and I'm using AI to process confidential client information, I want to be absolutely sure that, it's anonymized to the point that they couldn't trace it back to a client. I will oftentimes put everything I want to put in the text box of ChatGPT in a Word doc and treat it like I'm sending a document to opposing counsel. I'll redact it. I'll change names. If there's anything that's personally identifiable information, I'm scrubbing that out. And so I think that's overly cautious. I know colleagues who will do somewhat less than that. I don't think that's necessarily means you're violating rules of professional conduct. But I think that until you have some assurance that this third party isn't going to leak or isn't going to have a cybersecurity breach or somehow that this isn't a breaking the privilege communication, I think that you have to take the most conservative approach, especially as an attorney who's trying to build trust with your clients.
Does that come up a lot? Do clients actually ask you now, Justin, hey man, are you using AI?
Yeah, but not the way you think. They want to save money. And the clients aren't thinking about, well, I don't want the fact that me and my wife are getting divorced and the terms of our divorce being provided to this huge California-based company. They're more thinking, hey, can you use AI to save money? And some engagement letters will actually say, I've had this before where I've put in there that I reserve the right to use AI. Let me know if that's an issue. And I think that I will still abide by the rules of professional conduct and confidentiality standards, but I think it's a question up for debate. Can a client waive that? Say I came to you, Tim, and I said, I need representation. Do whatever it takes to keep your billable hour down to a minimum. And I don't care if you share my data with the entire world. What would you do?
So you bring up a really interesting point, Justin, and that's the idea of what do you do? So we're talking, and I want to get back to the billing discussion because that's really literally the billion-dollar question. But before we go there, the client comes to you and says, hey, Justin, just keep my bill down. Quite frankly, I don't care what you do to do that. How do you handle that?
Right. So that's a difficult situation. You're caught between, your client's indicating that they want you to use AI. They don't care about you negotiating confidentiality agreements for you spending an hour to redact every document that you put into an off-the-shelf generative AI chatbot. They want you to interact with AI software, carte blanche. You can do whatever you want. I think you're then in a position where, well, you want the client to have expressly, given you permission for that. I would reach out to your local bar association. I know here in Maine, I've worked really closely with the Board of Bar Overseers about these issues. There's a woman, Suzanne Thompson, who's excellent. She's assistant bar counsel. And I ask her questions on a weekly basis about, the proprietary of certain AI use. I would start there. And then I think that, provided you have the green light, you can, within reason, use any model to ask any question about your client's case. I think that right is theirs to waive.
So this is the point that everyone's trying to solve for, right? So if you're a law firm function on billable hours, so it seems like mass implementation of AI might be a little concerning to a law firm when you start talking about efficiency and the need to spend less time on redundant tasks. So there's going to be this nexus, I believe. To your point, pressure is going to start coming from the client to say, hey, get my bill down,
Yep.
right? And so now you're in a quandary. If you're the law firm that's trying to figure out, hey, if I use AI, I can get the billable hours down from 100 to 30. How does that help me? How are lawyers, as a lawyer, how are you guys processing that?
Well, I'll do you one better. What's happening is clients are reaching out with the product they think they need that they got from Anthropic or that they got from using, Gemini, the latest AI model from that they subscribe to, and they'll get that product from that model and they'll send it to us and say, hey, can you review this and let me know if it's right? And most of the time it's most of the way there. And so again, the question remains, what do you do? How do you maintain profitability? In the face of rising efficiencies, what do you do? And I think that one of the central tenets of law firms has been the billable hour, since I think time immemorial. I don't know when the billable hour became the one of the largest pillars of law firm business, but we have this sort of concept of it as fixed, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I know a lot of colleagues, take any like general counsel or attorneys who are practicing estate law, estate
Right.
planning. It's a fixed rate, it's a fixed fee, and I think there's also alternative business models like subscription, right? I've been talking to a client about, well, what if I worked with, guaranteed, you can have 10 hours of my time a week for a certain rate. If you fill it up, great. If you don't, you pay this rate. And if you go over, we'll talk about that if it's chronic, but if you go over just a few times each quarter, not a big deal. So my thought is, there's a lot of flexibility there. The billable hour causes tons of angst for both attorneys and clients. And I think that it is hard to see how that remains fixed as a central tenet of law 5 years from now.
My opinion is that that's the economic driver that has to be wrestled with. And to your point, we work with this. They're really proud, by the way, this law firm, Bertadato, out of Dallas, Texas. They went to a full subscription-based billing model within the last 5 years. Their law firm, for people at home, check out Bertadato, Dallas, Texas. Their law firm went from 6 employees to 35 employees. They own the American Medical Spa Association, and their clients are smaller elective medical practices, plastic surgeons, cosmetic dermatologists, med spas. And those groups tend not to have a ton of money to pay a big retainer and then, eat away at that retainer. So they have levels that, gold, silver, platinum, whatever it is. And that gives you X number of hours, X number of matters, X number of conversations. So for them, the implementation of AI is like everything, right? If they can get that communication right, they can automate so many things. And that feels like, to me, there's going to be this, it's going to come down to this. I don't think lawyers will be replaced by AI. And I apologize I don't like to wax on my own podcast when I have guests on. It's not that lawyers are going to be replaced by AI, but lawyers who are good at using all elements of AI are going to start replacing lawyers who don't. And I think that's going to be navigating that. Like, how do I stay profitable? And I think you said something very prophetic that I want to wind down on. What AI has done in the brain of the consumer, it has empowered them. They used to use the phrase back when I was a kid, oh, that guy's a Philadelphia lawyer. don't know if you ever heard that, but Philadelphia lawyer is a person who has no background in the law and is constantly spewing legal theory to everybody, right? They go, that guy's a Philadelphia lawyer, right? And essentially everybody is a Philadelphia lawyer now, right? Because they're going, hey, I did all this stuff on my own. You're an actual lawyer. Can you just spin through this and tell me if it's okay? And then the guy's like, well, that's 90% of my money.
Right. Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I think that it comes down to, what the client actually expects out of the lawyer. If you just want me to review a contract, that's the only, aspect of our relationship that you want me to engage in, I'll do that. Fine. I don't think that's going to be great representation. And here's why. I'll provide you the review. I'll say, this indemnification clause is weak. It's not mutual. You want to expand on this language. Here's a clause, here's additional words to add in there. Somebody can use AI to do most of what I do, on that front. I think that, there's certain judgment calls that I think AI would get wrong, certain aspects of the client's business that I don't think the client would pick up on and translating that to the contract. But if that's it, I think we're at great risk. All the good attorneys I know have a relationship with most of their clients where that's not it. It's not that discreet. You then sit down with some attorney from the other side, the offeree, and say, hey, we're going to negotiate this contract. Here's our language. What's yours? Here's their language. Okay. Here's our attempt to try to integrate your language with our concerns. What's yours? All right, here's your attempt. And you go back and forth. And then you talk to the client. You say, this covers most of what you are worried about. These products, I think, could give rise to these risks and liability in these circumstances. You're covered here. You're not covered over here. Can you live with that? It's communication with the other side, opposing counsel, and then with your client. And I think that iterates across all forms of practice, whether it's environmental, transactional, employment law, it's there. And so I think that contact in that negotiation, because a good opposing counsel won't be using AI. They'll be looking for subtle influences throughout the entire process. And a client who thinks that they got the final answer from an attorney who did one contract review is going to be disadvantaged. So I think that's where the value comes in. And I think that's where the values always come in. That's why, certain clients stick with certain attorneys, is because those attorneys provided that level of representation.
That's a great take. And it'll be interesting to see. And as a younger lawyer, your thinking about this is very, very advanced. I talk to a lot of lawyers, Justin, like your thinking is well advanced. Because there's still that group of folks who are like, AI, listen, I'm good, right? And what's funny is when I got involved in the industry, I thought a widespread adoption was way further down the road than it is. It's still really early, and the use cases are limited. But as we finish up, first of all, thanks for taking the time today. Really cool conversation. We got to the heart of the matter. I really do believe that, and it is the heart. It's follow the money, right? Yeah. And what that ultimately is going to drive a lot of this. But by way of review, I think data preparation is really important, right? I think in the modern lawyer's brain, processing how are you going to handle when that client comes to you and says, my stuff is 70% done, 80% done. I only want to pay you 30% of the money, right? You've given good advice around that, how to handle that and what the advantages are. And as a younger lawyer, I think it sounds to me like you're doing all the right things and you're processing this information. You're going to be well positioned in the future, and your firm is as well. So what advice would you have, knowing what you know about AI, knowing what's coming down the road for lawyers, young, old, regardless of size? Would you say, here's a couple considerations that I want you to take away from this discussion as it comes to integrating AI into your law practice?
Young lawyers, students in law school, people who are thinking of going to law school, get in front of the client, learn to communicate. There's going to be an incentive for your firm to, pigeonhole you in some way and have you do document review, analysis, certain things that you have to do, but shouldn't be your exclusive function. because if you don't learn to communicate, you're screwed. You're flat out screwed, because a lot of those other functions are eventually going to be replaced. And the biggest thing that younger attorneys and future attorneys can do is upskill their communication skills. So that's for young lawyers. For older attorneys, for folks who are more seasoned, who have been practicing for decades, I would recommend actually using this technology. It is absolutely shocking, Tim. Every time I present on this, I'll do a poll, and half of the room or more still hasn't used AI in a personal, let alone professional capacity. So in that, like, they have used AI. Everybody uses AI, for most Google Maps, Spotify, for using AI. They haven't used generative AI, and they don't know what it is, and they're completely at a loss. And because we're a risk-adverse profession, that's not the most tech, we don't have the highest tech acumen out of any profession. We're actually one of the lowest. There's this propensity to default to what we know, and especially for the decision makers, the industry leaders, and the folks who are kind of up at the top of most organizations, they didn't get there by just jumping there and having novel, progressive, like revolutionary approaches. It's consistent, conservative, risk-adverse approaches, and I think that's great. I think that'll temper the excitement of somebody like me, but I think they need to be a little bit more open-minded about the adoption of these technologies.
Amen to that. What a great time today. By the way, you have any speaking events coming up? You got anything planned? Seem like you really love that.
Yeah, I do. I'm speaking to, I think, the Wisconsin bar next week, and going out to Washington to speak to a NAHARA. They're having an HR tech summit
Cool.
And next month, and yeah, a couple fun things in the pipeline. We updated at Drummond Woodsum the AI practice group, so it's drummondwoodsum.com and our AI practice group. You can find our information there. But yeah, cool things in the pipeline. This is going to be a wild year, Tim. Things are moving quick, and we're going to see what happens. But it's going to be an event.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. This is awesome, and I love the fact that we got to the heart of the matter, and you're dialed in and got out of this intellectual nonsense, blah blah blah. No, how is this? I want this to be about how does this work? What can I do? What should I be worried about? And how can I think? The end of the day, we'll finish on this. There is a major intersection between what the client's going to demand and what big law, mid law, whatever is going to be willing to give. And I can't, and these are smart people, both sides. It's going to be really interesting to see how those models develop, the billable models, whether they be subscription or fixed cost models, that type of thing. And how big law navigates that. It'll be interesting. And they're going to have to call you to get your advice.
Well, I hope so, and I appreciate it, Tim. Thanks for your time too, and looking forward to the next conversation.
Thank you. So we want to thank everyone for joining us today on Legal Keys. As I mentioned, Legal Keys is brought to you by Faster Outcomes. Faster Outcomes is the ultimate legal intelligence platform for law firms of all shapes and sizes. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.